Seeing that many others have undertaken to draw up accounts of the events that have taken place amongst us, exactly as these have been handed down to us by those who from the outset were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word, I, in my turn, after carefully going over the whole story from the beginning, have decided to write an ordered account for you, Theophilus, so that your excellency may learn how well-founded the teaching is that you have received. Jesus, with the power of the Spirit in him, returned to Galilee, and his reputation spread throughout the countryside. He taught in their synagogues, and everyone praised him. He came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day as he usually did.
Ani Adonai bita achishena.
He stood up to read, and they handed him the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. Unrolling the scroll, he found the place where it is written,
"The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and the recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord."
He then rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the assistant, and sat down. And all the eyes in the synagogue were fixed on him.
"This day is this scripture fulfilled in your ears."
Is not this Joseph's son?
It was 35 years ago that I went to Zimbabwe, where we were living. There was no electricity, no phones, no running water. The way we kept in touch with people, especially friends and family back home in Britain, was with letters. And I would write quite often to friends back home, family. Initially, I'd describe the situation that I was living in, what the country was like, what the house was like, what we had and what we didn't have, and how we coped. Very few of the friends had ever been to Africa, so I would describe things in detail. One or two had been there before, and I was able to shortcut some of those explanations, those descriptions. To them I would say, the jacarandas are wonderful. But to others, I'd have to explain that jacarandas are tall trees that lined the streets of the cities, and that their leaves would be replaced with purple flowers in January. They looked as if they had purple leaves. To anyone who'd ever been to Zimbabwe Falls, Victoria Falls, I wouldn't need to explain what they were like. They would never forget them. But to others, I would do my best to describe what they were like, and probably fail to do them justice. What I wrote was shaped by who I was writing to, and their experience. Didn't change the facts, but it influenced what facts I would include in the letters that I wrote, what I emphasized, and how much of a description I would give. Looking at the letters I wrote now would tell you something about who I was writing to, and maybe something of their experience, If I didn't describe something in detail, then maybe it was because they already understood. And knowing something about me, the author, and the recipient, maybe the letters would make a little more sense. The evangelists who wrote the Gospels were also influenced by who they were writing for. And if we understand a little about the influence that shaped their Gospels, perhaps we can understand them a little better too. Luke's Gospel is only volume 1 of a 2-volume work, the second being the Acts of the Apostles. And it's clear from the way Luke feels that he needs to explain Jewish things that he isn't writing for Jewish people. Luke writes for non-Jews, for Gentiles, because he understands that Jesus' message isn't only for the Jews, but for everyone, and he wants everyone to know that. That's why Luke's emphasis is often on the role of people who traditionally didn't have an active part in God's plan of salvation, to show that everyone is important to God. It's one of the themes that runs throughout Luke's Gospel. It's one of the messages that he wants us to learn from his Gospel. But it isn't there explicitly. We only learn it by being attentive to how he emphasizes certain things. Sometimes we can only tell what Luke is trying to say, what he's trying to emphasize, by comparing Luke's Gospel with the others, particularly with the Gospels of Matthew and Mark. Sometimes it isn't enough just to listen to the Gospel that we hear in church on Sunday. Sometimes we need to read a little more or compare it with other passages so that we really understand the message that's being put across. Luke himself hints that his Gospel is more than just a simple biography. It's an ordered account, and that the order isn't simply the order in which things happened. Luke has put effort into constructing a Gospel out of the facts that he has to hand. But the way he puts those stories and facts together tells us something more than the facts do on their own. To understand that, we have to be prepared to put a little effort into understanding why Luke writes the things he does in the way he does. Take the second part of today's Gospel. Luke has Jesus begin his public ministry in Nazareth, reading from the prophet Isaiah, comparing that with more general introductions in Matthew and Mark, and the wedding feast in Cana that began Jesus' ministry in John's Gospel. Luke's account is different, but it's different for a purpose. Luke places this event at the beginning of Jesus' public ministry because it is a clear statement of all that Jesus' coming is meant to achieve.